And over here, the very first question mark worn Weatherbed. Any questions?
What happens at the wedding of a piece of baseball equipment and a G-string?
Easy, a bat marries a thong. Bat Marathon.
TV Land's week-long Batman Marathon unveils a new villain every night. The Penguin, the Joker, the Riddler, King Tut, and Catwoman.
Sounds perfect.
Don't I know you from somewhere?
All week starting tomorrow at 8 p.m. Only on TV Land.
Welcome back, citizens, to an all-new episode of the Batcave podcast. It's your old bat chum, John S. Drew here, and we're wrapping up a week-long look at Batman 66 in anticipation of the DVD Blu-ray releases. And, since those releases are coming out, one of the things I always think about when I get these sets is, what am I going to watch first? Which one should I watch? For me, this is going to be a really difficult thing because I'm also trying not to watch ahead of what I'm reviewing so I can keep a clear head when reviewing, but still, it's going to be difficult. So for this final episode, we're going to do a listing of what should be your essential marathon episodes. And joining me once more time for this episode is Dan Greenfield from 13thdimension.com. Hey, Dan.
Hey, John.
So now, for this final episode, we've also, as we've been doing all week long, we've been talking about these great prizes that we've been giving away, and we've got one more to finish off this great week. Dan, what are we giving away at the end of the episode?
It's just in time to be able to watch the show. You can watch it with Batman and Robin, actually. We have, from Diamond Select, a Batman bust, the limited edition Batman bust, along with a Robin bust, and so you can celebrate with your favorite beverage, adult or otherwise, a Batman 66 bottle opener. So you can sit back, pop open a cold one, or a root beer, or a bottle of milk, if you're like Bruce Wayne, and celebrate in grand style with Batman and Robin, and with the bottle opener as well, a little Batman party kit.
That is cool. That is cool. And you can turn to Batman and Robin and just exclaim holy whatever, like we do on the Batcave podcast at the end of each episode.
And thank you, and to mention, thanks to everyone who actually donated the prizes this week, and Diamond Select actually did provide those prizes. For example, some things, I know that you had arranged with Jim Beard and Bob Greenberger for the books. The Batman 66 comic I pulled out of my own personal stash, but the book itself, the hardcover from earlier this week, I got from DC, and so it's been a lot of fun.
Yes, thank you very much to all those who've contributed, and thank you all those to you who've been listening and who participated in the contest. This has been a great week, and it's gotten me all even more excited about this coming Tuesday.
Yeah, it's like a celebration for. When we talked about doing these special podcasts, it's at the site we've done. This will be our third Batman 66 week. We did the first one just because I wanted to. If I've got my own website, I'm going to do it.
Nice.
The second one came about because it was in celebration of the anniversary of the show, and as it just surely coincidentally was the week that they also announced that the show was coming out on disc, so it was perfect, opportunity. And then, of course, to do it for now, it's been a lot of fun, and also we've been doing profiling fans who've. We've interviewed. I've had the great good fortune to interview Adam West and Burt Ward and Julie Newmar and all of that. But to actually now interview fans, people like you and me who kept this thing alive and have kind of branched out into doing our thing. You've got the podcast. I've got the website. Other people have done books. It's really, really great that the Batman 66 community is thriving like it is, and I'm really glad to be a part of it right now.
As am I. And it's funny because this whole thing started because I'm trying to justify my love, and I'm discovering more and more I don't really need to. There's more than enough fans out there of the 66 series to sort of downplay the negative Nellies, so to speak.
It's funny that you say that because and we have our own episode podcast coming up where we did talk about this a little bit, just as a little spoiler alert. But, one of the things that I did ask a lot of fans was that I interviewed was, did you ever turn your back on the show, when you got to a certain age? And I was surprised at how many actually didn't.
Yeah.
And I was really heartened by that. I have to admit that I was one of those teenagers and 20-somethings who completely wanted to move away from it, and then only to find it and love it even better than I did when, well, I don't know if better than I did when I was a kid. It's hard to compare your love as a child versus your love as an adult when it comes to this sort of thing. It's definitely different. But to be as involved with it is it really is a tremendous amount of fun, and to finally see it all come to a head now is great. And if you'll indulge me, let me ask you real quick, because I'm doing this just off the top of my head, so forgive me. Since we're doing the contests, what of some of the merchandise have you indulged in yourself since they started putting this stuff out?
Do you know something? I haven't really indulged in much, to be honest with you. I mean, I have my own little small collection. I have a Batman Brave and the Bold doll. I have one of the Matchbox Batmobile cars, but I haven't really indulged in a whole lot, simply just because and this is not any fault of the manufacturers. I think it's great that they're offering so much variety. There's a lot out there.
Yeah.
It can get a little overwhelming at times. And of course, I do purchase the Batman 66 comic. I'm behind in reading it, but I always make sure I get it. I get the digital version just because I actually enjoy on my iPod, not my iPod, my Apple, my, what do they call it? iPad. I couldn't think of it. My iPad. I was about to call it the Batpad.
Nice.
My iPad. I enjoy the way they kind of animate the panels. It's not just a simple matter of the words appearing on the screen and such. When Batman and Robin fight, the thwack and the bam and the such, it kind of lights up as well, and it's almost like watching the TV show again.
I'm glad that you bring that part of it up, because one of the things to look out for at 13th Dimension this week during Batman 66 week is Dave Bullock, the artist, who did an episode. I call them episodes. It's funny. Did an issue of the Batman 66 comic, and I talked to him, and we went through the process of actually building a page. And it's at the site, and you'll see basically the breakdown of how the first sketch all the way to the finished product. And he points out about how they made the A panel versus the B panel and how that's all integrated. So it's really a fun way of doing something different if you do it digitally. I'm a Luddite when it comes to that. I appreciate all of that. I like it in print because that's just the way I'm programmed. But and part of that is also, I just love the fact that I can pick up a comic book that's about Batman 66. It's really great.
I think it's great too, but I find it so funny because a lot of times we do see comic books based on television shows in the past, and they fade away after 6 or a dozen issues, and yet this one is going strong to the point that
Yes.
I don't know if it's just adding the year on suddenly makes it more legit or what the deal is.
Like I mentioned in a previous podcast, for when it comes to superheroes, the fact that they're now going to do Wonder Woman 77, and I would love to see them do Superman 78, a Christopher Reeve, universe Superman. I think would be a lot of fun.
I hear a lot of fans asking for Superman 55.
Yeah, that would also be great, because you'd finally get to see some of those Silver Age villains done that you never saw on the show.
Right, yeah, that would be cool. So let's turn our attention now, though, to this. You've got the DVD set in front of you. What do you watch? What are you going to do? There's so much there. From Green Hornet to Batgirl to, the first Riddler episode to Robin getting a car. I mean, it's just, there's just so many, or I should say Dick getting a car, Dick Grayson. There's so many moments in the show. What do you watch? Now, here's the problem. In putting this together, you're going to give us your top 5 because, you're kind of outside the podcast. I mean, you come in, you do episodes with me and such. But for me, I'm trying to stay as pure as possible and not watch ahead. So I have as someone who's trying to grasp the whole series, I don't want to jump ahead. So to me, I have taken myself out of the mix here as to what would make good episodes of the marathon, because otherwise I'd just be going up to the point that I've reviewed so far. So I turned to people on Facebook, I turned to listeners of the podcast and to other guests who've been on the show before and asked them to give me some suggestions. So what we're going to do here is sort of our top 10 in no particular order necessarily, although I will give you the top 5 according to what people voted. So I'll get things started and we'll alternate back and forth and give you a list of 10 episodes you really should be looking out for when you unbox that DVD set. And the very first one with the most votes, a little bit of a surprise, but not entirely for me, was the first Catwoman episode, The Perfect Crime and Better Luck Next Time.
Yes.
They're here.
Excellent.
They
Splendid.
Is everything okay?
Perfect.
Well, I, for one, just don't like it, that's all. I mean, dealing with Batman and Robin. Well, I don't know.
Everything makes you nervous.
Well, I'd feel a lot better if I knew who he really was. The whole idea of a bat bothers me.
That's exactly what I'd expect from you. 5:30. Just enough time for a cat nap. Felix, scram. And have the car parked tidy corner at exactly 11 sharp.
Right.
I mean, I don't know. To me, I'm thinking of other ones that stood out first. Although I did love the fact that early on in the first season, Catwoman sort of got like a little bit of a promotion. Because there were times where people would say, Batman and Robin would mention Catwoman in earlier episodes. So they were almost like leading you up to this big adventure with her.
Here's my take on that particular episode. The funny thing is that if I were voting, I would have actually put that number one also. That would have been number one for me. And so I can articulate, I think, what I hope I can articulate for a lot of fans why. I think it's the series high water mark. And part of it is that it's an episode that has everything going for it that the show was trying to really project. It had action. It actually has drama, very dramatic ending, a lot of humor, tremendous sexual tension, a great death trap. That whole sequence that I referred to in a previous podcast about the death trap in this episode is basically half an episode or close to it. The whole interplay between the two characters. Every other Batman and Catwoman episode story, particularly Julie Newmar episodes, are basically variations on this episode. This is where they really made the template, and it's got it. Part of it I think is there's a certain dramatic. I always like when they had night scenes on the show. So you've got the night scene at the Egyptian exhibit. You've got that chase through the cave at the end. She falls to her death, because she's so greedy she can't give up her, the treasure. There's a mystery that has to be solved. And there's also, I think, a part of it, and I might be projecting my own thoughts on it, but this was the episode that they did for Viewmaster.
Yeah.
And this was, of course, which is the stereo-optical device that we all had as kids. We didn't have VHS. If we were watching it, I grew up in the New York area. You watched it on Channel 11. You had to wait for them to program the show the way they were going to program it, however, whatever order they were going to run the episodes. This episode, you could watch it at any time. So you would study it, or I studied it, the elements, the scene with them with Batman with his arms against the wall and with the spikes, and Robin getting sent through the pneumatic tube, and the tigers, and all of those elements I think really just combine for me to be ultimately the best show. Now, that's not to say that there aren't other great episodes. There are, of course. But to me, that's the one that kind of combines everything that you want in an episode, all comes together in that one.
And then just add Julie Newmar's performance.
Well, she's great.
Yeah.
She's just, and yeah, I mean, that's where I was getting at with the heapings of sexual tension. She is really, I mean, it's true. And I'm going to brag a little bit. I have had an opportunity to talk to her on a number of occasions, and she's wonderful. She has such great, I love her attitude about her time on the show and her life, and she is exactly as you would imagine her to be. She's very, very upfront about who she is, and there's a lot of old world Hollywood glamour about her, and that comes through in that performance too. She's a sex symbol, and she is any Catwoman that has come since. And we talked earlier in an earlier podcast about the Riddler being a minor character in the comics, and that Frank Gorshin made the character. In a lot of respects, the same holds true for Julie Newmar, because Catwoman had been off the grid for about 12 years. After the Wortham, little bit of history lesson for those who are listening, after the congressional hearings of the 50s, and after comics were really being turned upside down and they were trying to tone down the sex and violence, Catwoman just faded away. They stopped using her in DC, and so she hadn't been around except in the occasional maybe reprint. She wasn't seen, and certainly not this slinky version that they brought out with the hip-hugging suit and this, the sparkly outfit and all of that stuff, and of course with the long legs and the whole everything that you've seen about Catwoman since has been, whether it's been in the comics, whether it's been Anne Hathaway, Michelle Pfeiffer, whatever, the other actresses who played it on the show, they're all variations on what Julie Newmar brought to the character. And she definitely redefined the character for comics and made Catwoman once again an A-list character, whereas before she'd been more or less forgotten.
Which I'll agree with you, because it always drove me a little, like, I wouldn't say crazy, that's a bit too intense, but the Filmation Batman series, when Catwoman appeared on it, she was more of the old Catwoman of the comic books and not what Julie Newmar did. I guess that wouldn't translate as well into the cartoons.
Yeah, she was terrible. She had that screechy voice.
Yep.
Yeah, there was nothing appealing about that character at all.
No. Okay, so what is your first episode?
I'm not going to do it in order.
Okay.
Of like favorite. I'm just going to say the ones that I particularly love, and because it'll change. It's if you get me on a different day, I might say something else. But an episode that I think that everybody should have in their top 10, and I'm going to stay away from the obvious ones or some of the more obvious ones, but the first Mr. Freeze episode.
Poor devil. Forced to live in an air-conditioned suit that keeps his body temperature down to 50 degrees below zero. No wonder his mind is warped.
Your pity is all very well, Batman, but what is he up to?
Yes, what is the point of his shenanigans?
I see calling cards, Chief O'Hara, to let me know he's back in Gotham City.
Of course, he wants revenge.
I'm not so sure I blame him.
It was an accident, Batman. You didn't mean to knock that beaker of instant freeze on him during the fight in his laboratory.
The boy wonder is right.
He was the culprit, Batman, experimenting with those devilish instant freeze solutions, and for some criminal purpose, undoubtedly.
True, Commissioner. Nevertheless, I feel it's my duty not only to catch him, but with all the medical know-how at our command, to help that sorry creature back to a normal way of life.
I love it. The George Sand, it's funny to see the different versions. Otto Preminger in the second season, which is something you and I will be discussing at great length, is I loved his look. But in terms of the performance and in terms of the style of the first Mr. Freeze episode, which is, a lot of people may or may not be aware, is also based on the original Mr. Zero episode from the comic books. I love that episode. I love there's the glamour of the princess, and you've got the ball player, and you've got that sense of place, which I always liked what they did on the show, when you really felt that they were in Gotham City and that it was a place and not just the set. But specifically, I loved his hideaway, where you had the red and the blue. You had the red for the warm for the henchmen, and the blue so that Mr. Freeze, and he's got that panel where he presses the buttons, and it's a very basic but very effective special effect that they used on the show. And I always was disappointed that they never brought that back. I thought that was such a great bit. It improved upon what you saw in the comic, if you've ever read that story. And again, this is a case where Mr. Freeze, first off, they named him Mr. Freeze. A lot of people don't even realize that. He wasn't called that in the comics originally. They renamed him for the show, and he became an A-list villain, or at least a B-plus villain, because of the TV show, regardless of the fact that he was played by different actors. But also George Sanders is great. His voice, his menace, just everything about that episode, I think, is if you're going to step outside the Joker, the Penguin, Catwoman, the Riddler, right there, right behind them is Mr. Freeze. And this particular episode is the one that I would pick first.
Yeah, I love that episode too, and I agree with you about the animation, the freeze effect and such, because, when you consider the original Star Trek series, when they would do similar effects with the phasers, the actors had to stand still, and then they would insert the phaser line. Batman and Robin are moving, and, as the freeze thing fades away, but it's still there. That is an expensive optical effect to do.
Right.
And just damn impressive.
Yeah, there is I think there's one little hiccup where there's a point where they didn't change the color properly, or it's something that I've noticed as an adult that I never noticed as a kid. But whatever. But you're right. It's the fact that they did it, the fact that they thought to do it. Yeah, very impressive, and something that I think adds. And the funny thing is, I live in I live in a house without central air conditioning. So in the summertime, we've got wall units. We live in an old house. And, you go from one room that's like, 60 degrees in the heat of July, and then you go out in the hallway and it's roasting. I always think of that episode because of it. It's like my own house is like red zones and blue zones.
That's funny. Yeah. All right, so our next episode on this marathon is the very first episode. It's the Riddler episode, Hi Diddle Riddle, caught in the middle.
As a duly deputized agent of the law, I place you under arrest for armed robbery.
Snap on the bat cuffs.
You've got me, Batman.
What the?
It's too delicious. I even gave you a tip-off.
Batman, you've made a mistake. He didn't steal that cross.
What?
I tell you, it belongs to him. He lent it to me for a show.
But, Mr. Peel, we saw him take it from you at gunpoint.
Gunpoint?
Holy ashtray, he did tip us off. There were 3 men in a boat with 4 cigarettes and no matches. How did they manage to smoke? They threw 1 cigarette overboard and made the boat a cigarette lighter.
You saw him giving me a light as I handed back his cross.
Out riddled.
I thought you might be, Batman. That's why I brought witnesses with cameras. Oh, what is it that no man wants to have, yet no man wants to lose?
A lawsuit.
Correct, boy wonder.
We've been talking about this episode throughout the week here. I mean, I don't know how much more we could say just about how wonderful it is, how wonderful Frank Gorshin is, mentioning Jill St. John as the first mole, who, she's just as bad as Riddler is. She's just as willing to cause trouble and such. It's only at the very end do we see her weaken a little, where she's, because she's about to die, so of course she's scared.
Right, it's through fear as opposed to having an awakening. A lot of the malls, as soon as they see Batman, they turn on the villain and they're like, "Oh, I want to be with you," which is that classic mid 20th century sexism in a play. But yeah, I mean, she's pretty much bad to the bone all the way through. And the one thing I quickly note about that, and I'm gonna throw mad props to my son, because if it ever happens. One is that, I mentioned Figures Toy Company earlier. They've been doing these variants. I would love to see a Molly variant action figure where a little red-headed Robin, a female figure, I think would be great. Forget Carrie Kelly, I think it would be a lot of fun to have a Molly action figure. And that was my son's idea. I thought that was hilarious. But the other thing about that, and I'll throw this out there, because no marathon and no discussion of Batman would be complete without the Bat-2C, which a lot of people forget was actually from the very first episode. You assume that's something that came along as, if you haven't been watching, or if you've, whatever. And I know that anybody who's listening to this is likely a hardcore fan to begin with, and this. But it still amazes me that iconic image, or that iconic element of the show actually came in the very first episode. And it is still very, very funny. They did another version of it later, at least once, maybe twice. But the first one really gives you a sense of that they're going all out for the satire as well on this show. And it really gives you a sense of what the show is all about. And the fact that it comes in the first episode, I think, is great.
And just when you know also that there's nothing is safe from being tagged as Bat something.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yes.
Okay, so now what do we do for your next episode?
I'm going to jump ahead from where you are in your viewing, because I have within the last couple of years. Now, I haven't been watching much of the show of late on IFC or MeTV. I'll sometimes have it on as background, whatever. But I've been saving myself up since they announced, earlier this year that they were going to put the show out on disc finally. I've stayed away from my own, shall we say, less than savory version that I have on disc. But the episode that I would put up is one that'll probably surprise a lot of people. The season 3 Surf's Up, Joker's Under.
You're wiped out, Joker.
Yeah, you've hung your last 10 toes, and Batman's the new king of the surf at Gotham Point.
He's all yours, gentlemen.
Oh, gentlemen, those two hodads.
Commissioner Gordon and Chief O'Hara to you, Joker.
Cowabunga, Bigora.
Oh, no. Batgirl's not gone again.
I just passed her in the ladies' locker room. Are you all right, Skip?
I will be, as soon as they hook me and the Joker up to that reverserometer and reverse it.
Cowabunga.
Big aura.
Which I consider to be one of the series' high points. And I know that a lot of people hate this episode. They think that this is really like, Batman has just gone completely into the realm of the absurd. And to me, that's exactly why I love it. It is completely absurd. It makes, from beginning to end, having Commissioner Gordon and Chief O'Hara, calling each other Buzzy and Duke, wearing the silly sunglasses, by having them put the baggies on over their outfits, by having the band on the beach just inserted with the green hair, by having the dopey surfer and the surf transferometer and turning them into surfboards, and the Hang Five and Undine, C.V. Aber, who, by the way, was one of the absolute best henchwomen, talking into a hot dog. Everything about that episode, it's the best of the half-hour episodes. There's not enough Batgirl in it, actually. You get more Barbara Gordon, which is just fine. Not enough Batgirl in the episode. There are other better Batgirl episodes, per se. But if you haven't watched this episode in a long time and you're open to the whole comedic element of the show, it blows my mind every time I watch it. I love it. It cracks me up.
I seem to remember enjoying this episode. I mean, to me, the only images that really stay with me these days is, Joker and Batman on the surfboards in the water itself with the blue screen background as Adam West uses the bat repellent spray the shark repellent spray once again to get the sharks away from him, and he's doing it with a flick of the wrist almost, like as he's spraying. And of course I remember, like you said, a lot more Barbara Gordon in a very nice bathing suit.
Yes, she fills it out well.
Yes, she does.
But and I say that strictly from being dispassionate, but also even the scene where she and Dick Grayson run in and they go into the men's and women's locker rooms in their bathing suits, and they come out in their Batgirl and Robin outfits, and they look at each other like this kind of quizzical look, like, what are you doing here? And again, one of these very quick, blink and you'll miss it little moments. But also the fact that it's got as you saw in the second and third seasons after the movie came out, you have a cameo of the stock footage of the Batcopter, which also always adds an element. Whenever they would add a Batcopter or a Batboat or the Bat Cycle, after they'd used them in the movie, it was always a treat to see them show up in the show.
All right. For the next episode, I've got Bookworm. The Bookworm turns while Gotham City burns.
Inside my head. Oh, Bookworm, with a mind like yours, I wonder why you don't write your own bestseller.
Shut up! Oh, don't you dare say that to me.
But Bookworm,
you're taunting me, aren't you?
No, Bookworm.
Yes, you are. You're taunting, mocking me. And why? Why? Because I have no originality. That's why. Why? Because I'm only the master of stolen plots. Well, this will teach you when it comes.
Another episode we've talked about throughout the week here, and I have to agree that it belongs here. I mean, this was their first villain they created for the series, and when you think about it, you have Burgess Meredith as the Penguin, you have Julie Newmar. Julie Newmar does, recreate the character, but Burgess Meredith is working from the Penguin from the comic books. Cesar Romero is working from the Joker from the comic books and such. And now we get Roddy McDowall as the Bookworm, and this is a new character. So he has to infuse something into this, and he does. I mean, he takes the part and he owns it. This is another one of those characters and another one of those episodes where if somebody else were playing the role, I don't think it would have been as good. And if anybody else took over the role of Bookworm the way John Astin takes over the role of the Riddler later on, it wouldn't have worked.
Well, I do think, and we've talked about this. This is not one that I would put on my personal top 10 list, but I do appreciate his performance, and part of it is also because of his physicality. He's a slight person. He looks like a bookworm, and so you're right. I don't think that any actor would just be able to step in. There's an underlying menace to his performance that I think is also impressive.
Okay, next episode for you.
I would throw out there another Joker episode, and this would be the Pop Goes the Joker episode from late in the second season.
My painting is titled Death of a Mauve Bat.
Where is the bat?
Well, the bat gentleman is dead. It died in 1936, a very bad year for bats.
Of course, the bat is dead. It's symbolic.
Symbolic of what?
The emptiness of modern life. What else? Gentlemen, come with me. There's absolutely no doubt about who the winner is.
I kind of like what the monkey did.
I think our decision should be unanimous. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm very pleased to announce that the winner of the Gotham City International Art Contest is the Joker!
We've talked about other Joker episodes, the Joker's utility belt, and there are other great moments with the Joker and Cesar Romero's performance. This, to me, puts it all together. This is the episode where it opens up, and of course the Joker is as you saw again in the Batman '89 movie, Joker's basically ruining all these paintings, but then what he's really doing is making them into masterpieces. And the whole thing is a send-up of the 1960s pop art scene, which of course the show grew out of. It was that whole pop art sensibility and the whole camp ideal. The show plays with that, the scene of the art contest, with the monkey. The fact that the Joker's, winning masterpiece is a blank canvas. And then, of course, again, one of those episodes where it's a Bruce Wayne and Robin team up as opposed to a Batman and Robin team up. And so you get to see Adam West actually duking it out with the Joker, and the two of them antagonizing each other. The death trap that I mentioned earlier in the week in our death trap episode with the mobiles, with the spinning blade, with the Salvador Dali, card symbols in the background. Even the Baby Jane Towser, which of course was a send-up of Baby Jane in the '60s, the Warhol Muse, and of course you get the great ending where the Joker gets into Wayne Manor and is galloping toward the Batcave, and he goes into the study and he opens up the bookcase to reveal the bat poles. Only Alfred just happened to have repainted them, so they don't say Bruce and Dick, and it doesn't have the sign that says bat poles route to the Batcave. But then Alfred has his fun by sending the Joker up and down the bat poles before he could get into the Batcave. I love that episode, and it holds up on repeated viewings.
I do remember a lot of those images and such that you mentioned, and I do remember enjoying that one myself too. So yeah, I could see why that would be on a list. Our next episode from our listeners and our guests who've been on the show before, the Green Hornet's appearance on a piece of the action, Batman's Satisfaction.
Holy living end.
It looked like the end there for a minute, do I wonder? But there was a small niche between the gum applier and the perforating needles.
And we are both quite flexible.
But there wasn't enough room to use my hornet sting to blast us out until that panel was loosened.
But how did the machine take your picture?
No doubt an automatic image orthicon of some kind.
Wrong, Green Hornet. It was a high-velocity spectroscopic range reflector mini unit.
I'm going to be honest with you. As a kid, I never liked it. I never liked that episode. I thought the villain was dumb. I thought the plot was hokey. And at the time, I didn't know enough about the Green Hornet. We didn't have the series on in New York anywhere that I recall. Growing up now, and over the years, I've had a chance to watch the series. And based on my memories, I got this feeling I'm not going to even like it as an adult, because to me, it's like taking this more serious crime fighter and putting him in this silly situation with Batman. And I've got this feeling it's not going to work for me.
Well, see, the funny thing about it is that as a kid, and for the same reason, I don't think I even realized that there was a Green Hornet show, because it wasn't on growing up in New York. You didn't see it, in syndication. And even as an adult, I've only seen a couple of episodes. You can actually check them out. They're on YouTube.
Yeah.
But in any event, what I like about it is that it's more about the moments. You're right about Roger C. Carmel's Colonel Gum, is that you would think that if they had this big opportunity, they would have done a better villain. It's an episode with a lot of filler between the two parts. I do like the death trap, the turning them into gigantic stamps. And they actually do a good job of playing off the different tones of Bruce Wayne and Kurt Reed and how they do a good job with balancing the tones of the two different shows. Of course, you get your Bruce Lee and some of the fight scenes between the two duos are great. As a plot, it does not hold up well, but you do get the sense that it is an event. So I like the episode. People do, I think, sometimes, they, as a knee jerk, they pick it because it seemed like it was special when we were kids. But I agree with you. It's not quite as good as, at least for me, it's not quite as good as I remember.
All right, your next choice.
I'm going to throw out another one from the third season that is a Batgirl episode that is probably overall the best episode of the season. It's the Siren episode.
Batman and Robin, you're finished, I say. For hidden inside of your car, Commissioner Gordon is lurking, and soon he'll tell me whoever you are. Nothing quite so pleasant as a musical interlude, eh, boy?
Where it's really not a Batman episode at all. It's a Batgirl and Robin episode. And it's your first indication, of course, of that teaming. For me, as a Batman family fan, and I mean that both in the broader context, but also as a fan of the comic book from the 70s where Batgirl and Robin used to team up all the time, it's the first time you get to see that. They basically are taking the same element, but they're making Batman the victim, and Batgirl and Robin have to team up to take him down. And it's actually a very well-written episode. Siren is a villain who would have been very much at home in the comics back then and today. It's a great idea for a villain. Joan Collins is terrific, and it has a great climactic fight scene at the end where they're on a rooftop. And again, it's another night scene. For some reason, I always like the night scenes on this show. But it's clever. It's not over the top with some of the campiness, and it's an episode that if they'd extended it to 2, would have been at home, I think, in the first season, because it had elements of, if not drama, then certainly adventure balanced against some of the humor. Although it also does have the great scene where we find out that Bruce Wayne keeps his safe behind a painting of a safe. Which is one of the, yeah, and you can actually get one of those safe paintings online.
You know, I'd forgotten, though, because I recently saw this on IFC, that Siren, she doesn't just appear at the very end of the Riddler episode. She's also part of his plot as well.
You know, they were still trying to figure out how they were going to integrate some of these episodes, because if you didn't have a natural reason to come back the next day, or in this case, by the third season, the next week, because you didn't have a cliffhanger, you had to find a way to draw people back. So they were playing around with this idea that they had her walk in a scene, and then she walks in at the end. So now you've been introduced to a brand new character who looks like Joan Collins in this, great outfit. And okay, so now you've kind of been introduced to her, and now she gets her own bit the following week. And they didn't really do that much for the rest of the season, except for the fact that you would have that at the end, they'd say, oh no, Egghead's in town, and they'd show Egghead marching through the town or whatever, or through the city. But yeah, it's true that that Riddler episode is, she's kind of a co-star in it, but it's that first episode or the only really episode where it's just her that really makes it.
All right, our final episode here from our listeners and our guests is the Clock King episode, The Clock King's Crazy Crimes, and the King Gets Crowned.
Hobbits? Robbed? Broad daylight?
Commissioner, did you hear the news?
Yes, Chief O'Hara. And ominous news, I'd say. The knockout gas the criminals used came from an antique clock.
Then it's himself, that conniving crook who uses time for crime, the Clock King.
I fear we're in over our heads, Chief O'Hara. I'll contact the Kit Crusaders at once.
I recently reviewed this. I liked the episode a lot. I liked, Bill Finger's influence with the giant hourglass and such. And I even commented, I think, like you did with Siren, I think that this could have been a first season episode in many respects.
Yeah, it definitely feels that way. And I agree with you. And it's an episode that I like very much. We mentioned it in our Death Trap. It's got that great hourglass Death Trap. Walter Slezak's performance isn't so over the top as to be distracting. It definitely feels like of course, there's Clock King in the comic books in the same way that there was a False Face in the comic books, but it's a different character, really. It's essentially the version you're seeing here really is invented for the TV show. Clock King wasn't even a Batman villain in the comics besides, but it definitely feels a part of the better elements of the series, just like the False Face episode does. I was surprised that as many people, that it made the top 5 or whatever it was, but I definitely think it's a very good episode and one that I enjoy watching a lot.
So what's your final choice?
I'm going to qualify this one because the Joker-Penguin team-up, the Zodiac Crimes, is something that I will say they stretched it out over 3 episodes because you've got the Penguin in and out of the episode, and he's not in it quite as much as you might remember. But I think it would have been a nearly perfect 2-part episode. Too much filler, but there are great bits in that scene, or in that episode. You've got the 2 great death traps. You've got the concept of the Zodiac crimes. You've got some excellent fight scenes, the fight scene in the museum. And, of course, just getting to watch Cesar Romero and Burgess Meredith camp it up together and alternately hate each other and be bad guy best friends in the episode. I'm not crazy about Terry Moore's performance. Seeing it as an adult, it's way over the top and at times kind of annoying. But it's kind of a mess, but it's a fun mess. And the parts that I really like about it, I really enjoy, and it's one I still like settling in with.
I'm looking forward to that one as well, because also it was written by Stephen Kandel, who has written for Star Trek, $6 Million Man, Bionic Woman, and I found, based on what I remember from those, he's either one of those people who he does it really well or he does it really bad. There isn't a whole lot of in between, so I'm curious to see where I stand when I watch this episode again.
Yeah, I mean, I remember it, as a kid, it was like a big deal because it almost felt like a movie. Mm-hmm. You had multiple villains. It was multiple parts. It was, it's funny, we haven't even really talked about the movie at all this week. That's not even part of the set. But it had that element, or my recollection was that it had that. And it also had the scope of the Joker's plan to have 12 different crimes based on different zodiac signs. And I also, as a kid, I liked going to the planetarium. So you had that part of it. And there were parts of it that just kind of fit my personal sensibility. Again, there are definite weak points. Although I do like seeing that, you may not remember, but there's actually a scene with Rob Reiner. He plays a busboy or a bellboy in a hotel, or brings in room service or something. And it's like, oh my God, it's Rob Reiner. But that's one that I'd throw in there too.
So there you have it, folks. 10 episodes. Now, one thing you may have noticed, Dan pointed out some Batgirl episodes. Our list from our listeners and guests didn't have any. Now, that doesn't mean that there weren't votes for Batgirl episodes. It just means that over the majority that, I saw as we were tallying this all together, it didn't wind up being Batgirl episodes. So I just wanted to throw out just these 3 here that were honorable mentions. We have the Joker's Flying Saucer, which I always did seem to remember enjoying as well, even though I got this feeling it may not hold up now as an adult.
It doesn't.
No.
It doesn't.
Now, I'll Be a Mummy's Uncle. Is that the one where King Tut gets into the Batcave?
I don't remember it's funny, I should know that off the top of my head, but the one where he does get into the Batcave is a really strong 3rd season episode.
Yeah, no, I agree too. Just, if nothing else, it's one of the rare times we get the actual bat fight music playing.
Yes. Yeah, because they changed it up in the 3rd season.
Yeah.
But it does, anytime you see, visitors in the Batcave.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's always fun, and especially in this one where he bursts in. Yeah, it's a very good episode. I enjoy it. If that's the one we're talking about, yes, that's what I like.
Yeah. And then finally, our final honorable mention, the Londinium Larcenies, which I've got to admit, I kind of do like it. It didn't need to be 3 episodes long, but the fact that we get a London Batcave and a London Batphone, and I just loved it all. I thought it was very funny.
Yeah, it's a kick. Definitely plays with the whole, swinging 60s, London scene of the time, and very much is of its moment. Doesn't hold up for me some of the other episodes, like the Mr. Freeze episodes, and almost all of the Penguin episodes. It's funny. The one thing we didn't mention, through all of this, is that I just want to give a special shout out, because you mentioned it before, is the music on the show, which really does, not just the theme song, but the incidental music, which you can find online, and you can get a lot of it, not all of it. It's great, and it really adds such an extra, that jazzy score, and not even just during the fight scenes, but if they're skulking about at night, you get it has one kind of music, or the music that they play for traps, and it just adds a whole new element to the show.
Well, Davey, that'll be another Batman 66 week that we can get into further down the line.
Oh, I'd be happy to do it, believe me.
So as we start to wrap things up here, we've got one more thing to do as we finish off this week of Batman 66 here. I'm reaching in to the Bat Drum for our final winner of this pretty impressive contest prize here. And our winner is, holding up the bat-shaped Batman card here, Ian Patosh, and I hope I got your name right, of Syracuse, New York.
Yeah, congratulations. Diamond Toys sent over a couple of busts, Batman and Robin, and you also have your bottle opener, so you can pop open a beverage while you settle in for your marathon. It's it's nice to have Batman and Robin in the house while you're watching Batman and Robin.
So that's going to do it then for this episode of the Batcave Podcast. Head on over to the batcavepodcast.com and 13thdimension.com. Let us know, what are we missing in this Batman marathon? What would you include if you were going to watch the series with family and friends or introduce it to new people? We'd really like to know because, we want to keep this conversation going. So, folks, stay tuned. We've got one more episode. This isn't part of the Batman 66 week. We've actually got a regular review episode of the Batcave podcast, in which I and writer Glenn Greenberg are going to be looking at the Penguin episode. We mentioned it here in the podcast this week, the politics one, where Batman and Penguin are in a race for mayor of Gotham City. So stay tuned for that. That'll be in the feed tomorrow. And folks, again, I'll just say it one more time. Head on over to thebatcavepodcast.com and
13thdimension.com. That's 13thdimension.com. And again, want to point out that in addition to these podcasts, we're doing all sorts of Batman 66 coverage at the site this week as well. This is on a Friday, so we've had, by this time, you'll see a lot of stories for you to enjoy, interviews and retrospectives and the like.
And I'm sure by sometime next week, we'll also be seeing a pretty big review of the DVD set. Am I not mistaken there, Dan?
It might even be up by now.
Oh, okay. There you go. So head on over, folks. Don't miss out on all the great content and material, and don't miss out on future episodes of the Batcave podcast. So until next time, citizens, thanks so much for listening. Dan, once again, I really appreciate you doing this with me.
John, I'm really glad we did it. I thank you for having me, and let's do it again.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, folks, until next time, take care, chums. Thanks for listening, chums. I don't have a bat phone, but you can contact the Batcave podcast through its Facebook page, Twitter, email at thebatcavepodcast@gmail.com, or by phone at 888-866-9010. Subscribe to the podcast via Libsyn.com. That's LIBSYN.com. Or through iTunes. The Batcave Podcast is part of a series of pop culture podcasts from the Chronic Rift Network. Find them at chronicrift.com. So until next time, citizens, same bat time, same Batcave Podcast.